Alright, so I know I'm not the only one out there, but who else just isn't excited for James Gunn's DC Universe? Look, as much as the child within me would love a well done DC cinematic universe to rival the OG MCU, there are several reasons I just can't get myself hyped for this. I made a video a while ago about how sick I was of the DCEU and how eager I was for it to start fresh, but now that it is starting fresh, I just can't get on board with it. And maybe part of that is just the last disaster made me cynical. Maybe part of it is just that I'm tired and worn out by mainstream superhero flicks in general. But I've thought about it quite a bit now, and here's some of the biggest reasons I just don't have much hope for or desire to see James Gunn's Superman film and the rest of his universe. And then, if you'll stick around to the end, I'll share what I would be beyond hyped to go see. But if you're new to the channel, I'm just thinking out loud here, so if you want to hear more of my brain vomit, you know where the like and subscribe buttons are. And to those of you who subscribed before my sabbatical a couple of years ago, thank you so much for sticking around. I am so glad to be back and looking forward to getting back into it. So first of all, and I should admit, this is the least logical and grounded of my reasons, but I just can't make myself excited because I'm still mourning what the DCEU could have been. Whether or not this new actor turns out to be a good Superman, I imagine it'll be a while before I'll be able to see anyone but Henry Cavill as Superman, at least without crying over the fact that the actor born to play the Man of Steel didn't get to do him justice for more than one film. And I'm not a religious Snyderverse zealot or anything like that. I have complicated feelings about his films that should be the subject of another video entirely, but I was excited to see his gritty, grounded take on the superhero genre that promised to take a deeper look at its characters and challenge them in ways Marvel was rarely brave enough to do. And now, that's gone forever. I know Zack Snyder's films were certainly not perfect. I'm not one of those pretentious Snyder fanboys who thinks they were masterpieces, and anyone who doesn't realize that is just a tasteless moron. But I appreciated that he wasn't just trying to copy what the MCU had going and pump out a slew of identical, generic superhero blockbusters. In fact, that's why he was canned, because that's all Warner Brothers wanted him to do. He had a vision. He clearly had something original, something unique he wanted to do with his films, things to say and ideas to explore. His movies looked different, they felt different, and regardless of how well they were executed, that caught my attention and got me invested. This just doesn't so far. I know it's too early to really judge it, but with what we know, I just look at this new Superman movie and just see a generic superhero film. Nothing I know about this Superman movie sparks my interest or piques my curiosity in the slightest. I just can't find a reason to be more excited for it than I am for any of the weak Marvel movies desperately churned out by Disney. What makes it different? What makes it original? What's the vision behind it? I would love to be pleasantly surprised and find this to be an original and artistic addition to DC's cinematic history, the way the Batman was. But so far, we haven't been promised that. The Batman was the unique vision of one man given total creative control over his project without the constraints of building a cinematic universe on its shoulders. And while James Gunn could have something good going on, and we'll have to wait for the trailers to make any real judgment, this just gives me the impression of another money-driven, studio-managed attempt to recreate the MCU. And the fact that they're jumping into this new DCU as fast as they can after the death of the DCEU, without giving us time to mourn or giving themselves time to learn from their fumble and figure out what they're doing, just makes it look like all the more like a rushed business move, rather than the organic, creatively motivated work of love it needs to be successful. Which leads me right into my next point. This reason is one that's been talked about a lot, but one of the biggest red flags to me right from the start was the massive cast of obscure heroes in this movie. DC's been cramming as many characters as they can into all their films lately, and it just feels like it's a desperate attempt to get people interested in something they otherwise wouldn't be, while instantly expanding their universe in the process. And I can't help but wonder, did Warner Brothers learn nothing from where that got their last cinematic universe? People make a big deal out of Batman v Superman trying to launch the DCEU prematurely, which I can't say is an unfair accusation, but of the non-titular characters, at least BVS only brought Wonder Woman directly into the story, and all the other characters were only briefly teased, and hey, we're all pretty familiar with those characters already anyway. Besides, it's not like BVS was the first movie in its universe. James Gunn's movie, on the other hand, I mean, look at this. How many of the characters hogging the spotlight here have most people ever even heard of? How's Superman gonna have the chance to shine in his own film with so many other characters to get invested in? This is worse than the JSA showing up out of absolute nowhere in Black Adam. It just feels forced. It's like they're not even trying to build from the ground up anymore. They're just throwing us in the middle of this universe and expecting us to already care about this ensemble of characters half of us have never even heard of. And I don't know how big of a role these other characters are going to play in this Superman movie. Maybe they'll just be in the background, populating this universe with other heroes. But with how prominent they've been so far in the marketing, it just doesn't look like a good sign. And lastly, before I get to the fun part of the video, the biggest thing that scares me about this whole thing, the first thing that made me wary from the moment I first heard of all this happening, is the man in the chair himself. Now, I don't care about his tweets or anything like that. I'm not a hater saying the guy should be canceled. I'm not that kind of guy. I honestly don't even have a clue what all that controversy was all about because I just don't care enough to look into it. As a fan of these films, I'm only concerned with the celebrities involved as artists. I'm not concerned with their personal lives. But when I look at James Gunn as an artist, I just don't see the maker of a Superman film. I've never been a particularly big fan of his work, not because I think he makes bad movies, but I just don't care for his style of filmmaking. All of his movies, from Guardians of the Galaxy to The Suicide Squad, as fun as they are mostly just that, fun, and not much else. I may get some flack for this, because I know a lot of people love the characters of his movies, particularly the Guardians trilogy, and I'm not saying he can't get you attached to his characters and elicit emotional payoffs when he brings them on satisfying arcs. But come on, face it, you watch his movies to have a good old lighthearted time, not to have to think about anything too seriously. That, and they all have a very distinct kind of humor to them. Especially when he's allowed to go full throttle, his style is extremely irreverent, immature, loud, crass, vulgar, and especially violent. Pretty much everything that Superman isn't. Now that's fine. Perfect, in fact, for a movie about a misfit squad of convicted murderers, outlaws, terrorists, and lunatics forced to get along and be heroes. It's not perfect for a movie about the iconic paragon of virtue, heroism, and positive masculinity. That kind of a movie needs to be able to handle high moral values with sensitivity and nuance. James Gunn's movies have more in common with Deadpool than with any previous Superman films. And while Deadpool works for what he's supposed to be, I do not want to see someone try to make a Superman film even remotely like a Deadpool film. People often trash on Superman for being overpowered, and they are right that in a battle royale, Superman is not designed to be a balanced player, but Superman thrives in stories where the stakes are not physical or external, but moral in nature, because of what he represents. Superman is a messianic figure, an almost religious symbol of divinity and humanity combined. And the best Superman stories conflict his humanity with his godlike status, his power with his virtue and compassion. They explore what it means, what it would look like to be a tangible, real-life God to modern society, and how someone with his power deals with difficult moral problems without compromising what he stands for. Superman is a character who thrives on internal conflict over external conflict, a character built to explore themes of morality, a character meant to stand for something, meant to stand for good in a world of increasing darkness. And maybe it's just me, but I just can't see James Gunn getting that and doing him justice. But who knows? Maybe I'll be wrong. Alright, you've been patient, you've earned it. So like I said, it feels like most superhero movies nowadays are all the same. They look the same, they feel the same, and while in Marvel's case that creates a certain form of internal consistency, it does get pretty boring, especially when that becomes the standard for the superhero genre. I also have wondered why most superhero comics and films are constantly updating the stories to be more modern. Aside from a few origin stories, pretty much all superhero movies take place in the present day and are based on the most recent comic book incarnations of the characters, when there's a whole sea of source material from the early days that no one ever uses. So my idea for a unique and original DC cinematic universe would be to go back to the characters' roots. That's right, we're going back to the Golden Age. This would be a sort of period piece universe, exploring the origins of versions of these characters we've never seen on the big screen, against the backdrop of 30s and 40s America. We'd see Batman in a noir detective film in the vein of the old black and white crime thrillers, taking on the old school post-depression mafia. We'd see a much less overpowered Superman, taking gangsters and corrupt businessmen on high rides over the city skyline like in his first appearances. We'd see Jay Garrick's Flash and Alan Scott's Green Lantern. We'd see Dr. Fate and Hawkman, not to mention the now obscure names like Sandman and the Spectre. And like in the actual comics of the time, we'd see the Justice Society form in response to the rise of the greatest villain of them all, Hitler. This superhero team would have to deal with far worse and more complicated threats than aliens. They'd have to face the villains of the Golden Age comics, the very real horrors of the Second World War. The comics at the time were essentially propaganda, but looking back and telling this story from a modern revisionist perspective, it could be an opportunity to tell a compelling story, almost in the vein of Watchmen. Perhaps as they become entangled in real-world conflict, these beings would have to question their own place in this world. Can they take sides in a war without just becoming mere symbols of patriotism or weapons of war used by nations for mass destruction? In this historically based superhero world, all the moral complexities of the era, from fascism versus communism to the morality of nuclear war, would be visited through the eyes of our heroes, forced to grapple with these issues. And we could see how history might have played out in a world where gods fought alongside men in the greatest conflict of the century. Now that would be a fresh, original superhero story I'd pay to see in a heartbeat. But that's just an idea. What do you all think? Let me know in the comments. I hope to see you next time, and until then, never stay silent.